Thank you, Faye, or Madam Woman Federation, World Federation Madam, as we refer to her now. She should have perhaps added that I am a biotechnologist, but I've now moved my research focus to cognitive neuroscience. So people may wonder why I'm talking about neuroscience. In particular, I do genes to cognition or genes to consciousness projects. The talk today is linking the brain to the right to die movement, not something I'm researching. People in the field might find it a little bit oversimplified, but it is designed to inform the right to die movement, how we can use the brain to inform the right to die movement. I'm going to begin with this question. Is ending your own life an irrational thought? We tend to think it is. Well, the public would tend to think it is. We grow up thinking of it as desperate, emotional, tragic, the concept of Romeo and Juliet. We all grow up thinking that. I thought that too, until my mother ended her life. My mother was a highly intelligent woman, extremely intelligent, a medical doctor. She had terminal cancer. At the end of her life, she decided to take her death into her own hands rather than face a terrible death from cancer. It seemed very, very rational. Nothing irrational about it. She did go on a hunger strike, and that was a dreadful way to go, and I ended up being arrested for her attempted murder, but that's another story which we won't go into today. But her decision to end her life seemed totally rational, to have control over her death. So it can be a rational thought. So why is it that the public, the image is totally irrational? For us who are informed, we think it's quite rational. Let's look at the brain. All our rational decisions are made by our frontal lobes, including ending our own life. So it is coming from a rational part of our brain. Our brain evolved along the pathway here that you're familiar with. This is your family tree. About 4 million years ago, our early hominids evolved into the Australopithecus, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Homo sapien. Defining that evolution was the growth of the neocortex, the upper layer above the reptilian brain, and in particular, the frontal lobe. That increase in size of the forehead was allowing for the growth of the frontal lobe, and that gave us our intellect and our self-awareness. Let's think a little bit more about that now. How does the frontal lobe work? It doesn't work by selecting and making decisions. It works by inhibition. For example, if I were to offer you a drink, a Coca-Cola, tea, coffee, or a brandy, your brain would not choose. It would say, I don't want that, I don't want that, and what is left, you would reach for the brandy. Okay? A gin and tonic for Faye Gersh. We do it by inhibition. When it comes to ending your own life, you're inhibiting everything, implying a greater power of the frontal lobe, a greater power of inhibition. You don't want to know what's going to happen tomorrow. You don't care what's going to happen to your children, or you don't care, but you don't want to know. You're letting go. Incredible power of inhibition, implying a greater intellect. By contemplating ending your own life implies a greater size of the frontal lobe. Now, before you go rushing back to your hotel rooms to end your life, to prove how intelligent you are, there is a clause: when facing an unbearable end, when there's no hope of recovery, then turning to an assisted death or ending your own life does imply greater inhibitory power. Do animals commit suicide? Very interesting point. They have a brain the same as us. We've evolved along the same path. They do have a frontal lobe. Certainly the primates have a higher one. I'm not going to go into this, but if there is time at the end, I will come back to it. But they don't commit suicide, really. There are a few examples. They don't have the same power of inhibition that we do have. Now, I'd like to demonstrate parts of the brain and how they illustrate important rationale for supporting our law change. I'm now going to ask you to participate. I'm going to give you two choices. Option 1, I'm going to give you 50,000 rands right now. I know it's not a lot in euros or dollars. Option 2, I'm going to flip a coin. If it's heads, I'm going to give you 200,000 rand. If it's tails, you're going to give me 200,000 rands. Okay, two choices. Raise your hand if you'll take 50,000 rand now and walk out the door. Okay, thank you. And those who would like to flip the coin, that lady I'll meet outside, thank you very much, afterwards. So only one in the whole room. And the reason is our brains have evolved to avoid uncertainty expressed in the amygdala here and relayed to the amygdala by the anterior cingulate cortex. Our brains evolve. They're a product of evolution. We want to avoid indecision, avoid uncertainty. Let's go back to my mother. She had a choice. She had terminal cancer. She was a doctor. She knew what was coming. Her choice was keep on going. Maybe I have a good death. Maybe I have a dreadful death. I'm not taking a chance. I'm ending my life now. She took option 1. But say she was given option 2 with a slight twist. Option heads, she has a good death. She keeps on living and, okay, she gets cancer but doesn't die too terribly. But we flip the coin. Instead of a terrible death, she has the option of an assisted death. And that is what the law change is about. Relieving the stress of the uncertainty. No uncertainty at the end. That is relieving the stress on our amygdala. And we can see that when we look at that Oregon paradox. We know here that of the people prescribed the medication to end their life, 40% do not take it. An incredible statistic, really. Why? That 40% want to know they've got the option in case they need it. Their stress is gone. And that is what the law change is about, providing an option to relieve that uncertainty and ultimately saving lives. People won't commit suicide if they know they have that option available. My mother probably would have lived to the end if she knew that option, a natural end, I should say, if she knew that option was available. Another interesting statistic that we are familiar with, assisted deaths, females outnumber males in countries and states where the law has changed. Suicides, much more males all over the world and in every profession except medical doctors, interestingly. Why is that? Why are so many men committing suicide, very few women, but more women turning to an assisted death at maybe at Dignitas? Is it that women are more vulnerable to this law change? They're old, weaker, and they've been taken advantage of? Or can women not shoot themselves? That's what it comes down to. And if we look at the brain, the answer is quite clear. Women do have a smaller brain, no doubt about it, smaller frontal lobe. But, before we have any objections, they use their brain, they use all of their brain. Men don't. Men... Now, I speak having a highly intelligent mother, so I'm not at all being judgmental. The region linking the hemispheres, the left and the right, is called the corpus callosum. It's like a network cabling between the two hemispheres. Women have a much stronger connection between the two sides than a male. A male, in addition, is more able to compartmentalize his thoughts and compartmentalize decisions. Here we have a demonstration of a male on the left, a female on the right, reading a book, the same book. And you'll notice the female's brain is lighting up on both sides of the brain. The male has compartmentalized his reading and thinking. And we know men are very different, and females are very different. We come across it all the time in life, but it can be very clearly demonstrated here. And when it comes to ending one's life, again, a male is able to compartmentalise the thought, and is able to shoot himself. A woman, there's much more going on, much more complex thinking. And I think women probably relate to that better than I can. So the bottom line is, the law discriminates against women. Suicide is legal, but a woman can't shoot herself. So it is discriminating against women. Okay, we're talking about rationale for supporting a law change. Now I'd like to look at the actual methods for how the law should be interpreted or written. You're familiar with assisted dying by self-administration, as in the United States, or voluntary euthanasia, where the doctor helps you by a lethal injection. Okay, the next slide, I want you to, I'll brief you before I show you. You're going to make another decision, which is going to demonstrate an important point. You're going to be in a position where there is a train speeding along a train track. It's going to kill 4 men down the track who are lying on the track or working on the track, but you can stop it. You're standing next to a big fat man. If you give him a big push, he's going to stop that train and save those lives, but he will die. My question to you is, can you push that big fat man? There you are. Oopsie, I can't see it. I've lost the sound effects, but don't worry. There he is. You're there. Can you push him? Raise your hand now. If you've got 1 quick second to push that. Who can push that big man beside you? 1 hand. Thank you, Hugh. Maybe 1 at the back. I'm changing that situation now. Option B, at the top here. Instead of a big fat man next to you, you can pull a lever and that train is going to divert onto another track. Oh, and you're going to kill 1 man and save those 4 men working on the track. Can you pull that lever? You've got a split second to pull the lever, divert the train, and it goes to the other track. We've got at least probably about 3/4 of the hands going up. Okay, what's the difference? In either case, 1 man is going to die. And you've saved 4 men. No difference. What the difference is, the option you chose, no touching. You touched a lever or a button or Philip Nitschke's computer. Option 2, you touched. You touched someone. And in terms of the brain, you're using your right temporal parietal junction, which is involved with empathy. If you're able to neutralize that by a process called transcranial magnetic stimulation, so you don't feel empathy with other people, you won't be able to distinguish between these 2 decisions. It is your brain that is stopping you doing the pushing. In terms of a law change, the not touching is the doctor. The not touching is giving the drink. You are not involved. They do it themselves. The touching is the doctor giving the injection. The end result is no different. Why make the distinction between the methods? Public perception. The public are not comfortable with a doctor being involved and maybe the person doesn't really want it, they've changed their mind, touching. But really, what the people want, you look at the Netherlands, 90% choose a lethal injection, or I'm told much more than 90%. So in countries where the law is about to change, or we're talking about it, like South Africa, it's crucial to have the doctor involved providing that lethal injection. Okay, now we're getting to the mental suffering, quite a controversial point yesterday. Who should qualify for an assisted death? Vast majority of those qualifying suffer physically, and that would include cancers that you can see by X-ray. Mental suffering, very few people are getting an assisted death. Why are we discriminating against a person requesting an assisted death because of mental suffering? Who is suffering more here? The man on the left, he looks like a reasonable guy, not too stressed, or the man on the right, hooked up to all those tubes? We obviously will look at the man at the right and feel very sympathetic. Why? Because half of our brain's processing is devoted to visual stimulation and visual processing. If we don't see it, We don't empathize with it. We don't understand it. We can see physical suffering. We can see the cancer and the interpretation of it. We cannot see mental suffering, and we underestimate it. Really, really crucial to be aware of that. We don't have sound, do we, on this? I didn't have sound. I'm going to show you a video clip. It doesn't have, if sound doesn't work, we'll move on. There's a man, it's a comical strip. He's a boss in the office. He's having a telecommunication of his colleagues or his inferiors who are gone to a conference. It might be equivalent to some of the people who are not here today.
So we will get that schedule revised and sent right out to you, sir.
That sounds good. Listen, I should be back in the office on Tuesday. I'd like to see an updated P&L.
Very good, sir. Yeah. We're all over it. Not a problem. Take care.
That was close.
Yeah, that was close.
I can still hear you.
I think we're good. Yeah, that should do it. I think we're good.
FedEx, proudly bringing you the FedEx Cup.
As I say, a large part of your brain is devoted to visual processing, so we can take advantage of it. Okay, now moving on to another point related to this. Our own brain doesn't distinguish between physical and mental pain. And ultimately, I'm going to come to the point that physical pain is mental pain. They're the same thing. And here we have try and simplify it. There's a part of the brain involved in detecting feeling. Body parts, if you touch your hand, you know you're feeling a touch on your hand. Somatosensory cortex. If I was to neutralize that part of your brain using transcranial magnetic stimulation, you wouldn't know I'm touching your hand. Now, following that neutralization, if I was to put a blindfold on you and cut your hand, you would feel pain, but you wouldn't know if it's physical pain or mental pain. If you neutralize that part of your brain, demonstrating how easy it is for your brain not to know, your brain doesn't know. So why should we be distinguishing this in the law? Let's go back to this man. Oh, in fact, the man we looked at before was Ernest Haas, who Sylvan talked about yesterday. He had bipolar, so he had a mental illness and was denied an assisted death in Switzerland. And as Sylvan mentioned, he went to the European Human Rights Court and was granted an assisted death. In terms of the brain scan, his brain could be scanned for bipolar, and you would see the fluctuations between manic, depressive, and sane. You could actually determine at what stage he's making his request and when he has got a sane mind. And clearly, he could make that request in a sane mind. I pose another question to you. Can a happy person make a rational decision? We tend to assume that's the case. If you're happy, you're content, make a sound decision. Let's put it here. You've gone shopping, you got your paycheck. Friday night, you've bought everything, and the next morning you wake up and look around at everything. What was I thinking? And what neuroscientists tend to think is that a person who is often sad or in a depressive state thinks or views the world more thoughtfully than a happy person. So maybe a happy person can't make a rational decision in terms of ending their own life. Okay, a question that we addressed quite a bit yesterday, especially Philip Nitschke. Can a professional assess the mental competence of a person wanting to die? Here are two diagrams. In both diagrams, the circle in the middle is the same size. The circles around them are clearly different sizes, making them look different in the middle. Now, I'm using that to illustrate quite an important point. Imagine we have a gentleman, let's call him Oscar. He murdered his girlfriend on Valentine's Day, and he's a paraplegic. Okay, he is being assessed for his mental competence to stand trial for murder. And what do the psychologists say? Yes, Of course he's mentally competent. He's been an athlete all over the world. He's wealthy. He's got lots of friends. Of course he can stand trial for murder. That could be the diagram on the left. Now, the psychologists are given a different situation. This man, Oscar, wants an assisted death. He's so depressed. And what do they say? No, this man, he's a paraplegic. He's been bullied all his life. He's suffering dreadful mental stress. No, he cannot have an assisted death. The same person in the middle, different interpretations. The point I'm trying to make is that in terms of the right to die legislation, the professionals shouldn't know they're assessing the mental competence of a person wanting an assisted death. All they should know is they're assessing the person's mental competence. And I love the comment from Philip Nitschke yesterday, we should be using AI to do it. Let them make it. I don't want to undermine the professionals. They do a very important job, which I'll mention in a moment. If the medical or psychological professional can't assess the mental suffering or the mental competence of an individual wanting an assisted death, what can they do? We don't want to eliminate them completely from the equation. We don't want them judging. We want them to nudge. We want them to nudge them towards maybe seeking additional help, maybe taking medication, not forcing anything on them, not forcing them not to end their life. It's an individual's choice. Sure, be involved, very important, be available. You know what, it might be the only counselling they've ever had when they go looking for an assisted death. Maybe they've been suffering terribly all their life, they go to an assisted death application, finally they see their first psychologist. Okay, maybe that's a time they really could be nudged into living, but don't judge them. It's an individual's choice. That has come up repeatedly. In terms of Dignity South Africa, we are using our brains to campaign to legalise assisted dying, and our theme is certainly to nudge and not to judge. But I don't want to undermine psychologists and psychiatrists. I know there are a few here. They do a very valuable job. That's the end of my talk. Thank you very much.